Crimson. Crimson. Crimson.
The red-clad stallion jumped from his thoughts of the trauma he'd been cursed with, having been triggered upon his therapist, Dr. Calyson, relaying the several nightmares he'd experienced in the past weeks. Chills lapped his nerves upon returning to reality, his long body laid out on the provided couch of the room, lit only by a single pair of luminescent lights. Across from him in an aged recliner was the Mary he had become annoyed with over his visit, her icy cold eyes looking over him like a hawk. Her blonde mane was in its casual bun style. She was dressed in her usual professional attire, with a lone name tag pinned into her left breast pocket, and her suffocating essence of cheap perfume she bathed herself in every morning before coming to work filled the room. You would think she was of an older age by the smell, its smell being a pungent lavender with a mix of roses. The smell you always get whenever you're in the company of a mare way past their prime. However, she was actually young and somewhere in her mid-30s, using the perfume of her elderly mother or granny to cloak the cigarette odor she was trying to hide. Crimson wasn't stupid and had known of her secret addiction ever since day one of their first meeting, having spotted her preferred brand of cylindrical poison in her purse by accident. He'd rolled his eyes at the attempts to hide it, not even caring about her habits in his current life of inescapable trauma, fear, and horrors beyond any imagination. His scars told the story well enough, reminders of the nightmare he'd never forget to his grave. From his prosthetic hooves to the AF brand on his flanks, the horrors of the 3 days he'd spent restrained to that wall in that slaughterhouse remained as vivid as the very day he had been tortured with such unholy methods. He hadn't been the same since he'd proven to the entirety of Equestria beyond Ponyville that there had been an unimaginable evil plaguing his hometown for a decade's time. He traveled for miles after successfully sentencing the head of the massacre to eternal damnation for good, having found a small town after 2 days of agonizing walking. At first, every pony had just thought him to be delusional after losing so much blood, up until Crimson had made the proposition of going there to see for themselves. After getting Crimson medical help, the pony who had thought him delusional made the trip to Ponyville, and upon investigating the barn and finding horrors beyond belief, only then had the police and royal order gotten involved. What that lone pony had discovered had only been the start of a real nightmare that would leave a mark in history. An entire team of officials from the Canterlot quarantine facility were called to excavate the entirety of the farmhouse, and what they found was beyond any definition of evil or sadistic. The house had reeked of an overwhelming stench of rot, similar to the smell of a bloated dead animal that had been cooked in the heat of summer for weeks. It had been so bad that no pony could bear to proceed past the kitchen, and had only returned after shielding their faces with gas masks and dressing their bodies with hazmat suits. The stench alone had assured them that whatever lay ahead was nothing short of disturbing or malefic. But they still had proceeded into the house as bold and brave soldiers walking into a war zone. Upon treading to the second floor, not even their suits or gas masks could shield them from the strong smell permeating the entire upper floor. Those brave mares and stallions still tread that house of horrors, and after finding the main source of the smell, proceeded with unveiling the discovery that would haunt them and equestrian history for the remainder of time. Upon tearing into the walls, up to 50 bodies that had been gutted and preserved with an expression of their last scream or plea were discovered. Their bodies had been supported by a metal pole that had been inserted into their rectum up through the carcass, up until it met the entrance of the throat at the back of their mouths. The way the corpses had been preserved felt like an act of possession, as if they saw them as trophies and displayed them in the act of screaming to further capitalize on the amount of hopelessness they all had felt in their last moments of life. They had been the first victims of the horrific acts before the grinder had become their main tool of their in-pony acts. Among 50 plus corpses had been the main 6 and the princesses, having been preserved sickeningly in a special way. Their corpses had been preserved in a mockery of the acts of good, as if it were a declaration of the apples proving that evil triumphed over the very ponies that represented good. Less to say, it had been a sight that had caused a great deal of emotion to the ponies that had made the horrific discovery. Some of them went insane, while others even took their own lives, their minds too traumatized to live life normally after the discovery. It truly had been a feat that came with irreversible mental damage, but those who had been affected knew the cost and took it anyways. It's been over a year now, and the farm is still being gutted of its contents. The only thing proving that more bodies remain to be found is the families of the victims that have yet to say their final goodbyes to their beloved innocent victim of an unspeakable fate. The thoughts of what may have happened to those poor ponies were what constantly plagued Crimson's mind. And he knew this game of Dr. Calyson asking him questions and telling him he'll eventually heal from those 3 days of torture, violation, and unmendable trauma was just a giant waste of time. Oh, I'm sorry. What did you say? Crimson played, not allowing her any entrance to his true thoughts. Calyson let out a long sigh that expressed annoyance and impatience.
I asked you how your sleep has been since our last visit. According to my notes from your last visit, you said that you'd been unable to sleep due to the trauma of the 3 days you spent in that place.
Oh, sorry. I spaced off. Crimson half-heartedly apologized.
It's okay, Crimson. It's not your first time spacing off.
Right. Well, to answer your question, it's been the same.
I see. Well, seeing nothing else is working, I'm going to write you a prescription for a medication that should help you rest. Just have a nurse assign this to a pharmacy, and you should be able to start taking it nightly by the end of today.
Once she finished her scribbling, she got it from her seat and walked over to Crimson to give him the prescription note. Crimson just obeyed, but in reality wanted to roll his bloodshot eyes at the wasteful option and shred the note to pieces. He knew it wasn't going to work. His trauma from Applejack's cruel and relentless acts of malevolence and pure evil was permanently embedded into his psyche like a tattoo or brand to flesh. His thoughts would never escape those 3 days of absolute hell, and no medication or alternate method would cure the mark the apples had left on his mentality. At this point, he was just waiting for his sanity to fade to nothing and lead him to the point of no return. He eyed the clock, thankful he was 15 minutes away from getting out of this mare's mane so she could go to the roof to inhale her toxic habit, and he could go back to his hospital room to just waste away the rest of his day. Up until she said something that caught him off guard.
Don't think you're off the hook just yet. Look, I know you don't like talking to me, but you're going to have to deal with me for just a while longer.
What do you mean?
Your doctor asked me to do something that may allow you to start taking steps to start healing, but only if you're willing.
Crimson could sense something ominous in her voice, and it made him shiver for some unknown reason. What had his doctor decided that would supposedly better his health? And what might that be? He questioned with a tremor in his voice.
Facing the very fear that has led you to this point, I have been asked to take you back to the Apple Family's Foundation to make you realize there is nothing to fear anymore.
A shiver with a blistering cold sensation slithered down Crimson's spine at the very mentioning of returning to that blood-stained foundation. The very nerve that his doctor had even come up with this vile idea to cleanse his trauma was nothing short of unforgivable. Are you serious? Taking me back to that Celestia-forsaken place will only drive me into further insanity.
You don't know that, Crimson. Besides, I'm just following your doctor's orders. Not saying that I agree entirely with it.
Crimson calmed, realizing he was shouting at the wrong pony about this sick idea. But nonetheless, he still wasn't happy about any of it. Do you agree to this twisted idea, Doctor? Do you think taking me back to the very place that caused my sanity and life to permanently plummet is a good idea? Calyson took a moment to pause and think. In her 20 years as a therapist, she'd never come across a case like Crimson's, but one of the methods she learned in her years of training was that confronting fears can allow someone to overcome that very fear. As a filly, she had been deathly afraid of spiders, up until the day she had decided to face her arachnophobia by allowing one to crawl on her skin. It had been a terrifying encounter, but once she knew that the arachnid had no interest in biting or causing her any problems, her fear had suddenly faded away. That's not to say that after that day she had befriended any spiders or allowed any to explore her flesh freely, only that it had assured her that spiders were not out to get her. Therefore, it had eased her of any fears she may have had. However, spiders were nothing close to what Crimson had become traumatized over. From being branded, to tortured in twisted manners, to being violated by his torturer non-consensually, spiders were filly's play in comparison.
To be honest, it's a 50-50 chance, Crimson. In my years, the tactic of confronting a fear to extinguish it sometimes succeeds or doesn't. However, in the end, there's always that chance. And to heal, you're going to have to make some decisions that involve things that you may not like.
Crimson paused, knowing she was absolutely right about everything she had just said. While he never wished to return to the place that had brought him unspeakable mental and physical pain, he also knew that there was the chance that confronting and attempting to bury the memories of those 3 days of hell could heal him of the pain he still endured. With a very heavy sigh of defeat and every fiber of his being covered in goosebumps, he answered, "All right, I'll go." Calyson smiled at her accomplishment, not expecting her words to have swayed his thoughts otherwise.
Thank you, Crimson. Acceptance is the first step to recovery, and the fact that you're realizing that shows that your mental strength is growing stronger.
He nodded, awaiting Calyson to direct him further.
Let's get going. Our time will be very short due to the excavation still being in process.
Upon the sight of the gate that led into the Apple family's property, Crimson's entire body shivered. He remembered it all. The faint sight of the rusted sign through the few holes of the bag on his head he had been covered with, the squeak it had made waving slowly back and forth in the wind, the torture before entering the slaughterhouse. It brought him massive discomfort, and his stomach churned at the vivid memories. While the Canterlot quarantine facility was there, Crimson only saw the farmhouse as he had that day he had arrived. He remembered every detail, from the smell of the bag, the inability to breathe while being waterboarded, Applejack's demands and violent tactics, and even the chipped paint fragments barely holding on to the barn door. It felt as if history were repeating itself with every step he took closer to the farmhouse, only being broken from his vivid memories by the sound of Calyson's voice.
How do you feel, Crimson?
She asked with a tone of curiosity and concern. He shook his head, finally returning to reality. Once his vision focused, he saw the farmhouse. Only this time, it was different. It was covered by a gigantic translucent dome, the only entrance being a door that was currently ajar with ponies in hazmat suits cycling in and out with various materials. Some carried tools and things significant to their work, while others carried things from the inside of the farmhouse like rotted wood and belongings that once were the apples.
Crimson?
Calyson's voice addressed him again, to which he jumped and turned his head to. Huh?
I asked you, how do you feel?
Sick. Everything that happened that day I was forced here is as clear as day in my mind. I remember everything. The pain, feeling, every single detail. It's just as vivid as I remember. She nodded.
I imagine it is, and I'm glad you're being open with me about exactly how you feel. Are you good to continue?
Crimson nodded, stepping forth and through the dome's entrance. Upon stepping through, everything changed. The open world was now as silent as a mouse navigating a kitchen for food in darkness. It wasn't his mind playing tricks on him, though, and as he walked further towards the entrance to the home, he swallowed the saliva built up in his mouth. The house was just as he'd remembered. The floorboards creaked like nails against a chalkboard. The table where he had been forced to eat the carcass of a long-dead animal was still set neatly, and upon looking to the left, saw the door that led to the torture chamber he had occupied for 3 days and nights. The scent of rot still occupied every fiber of the wooden walls and floors, a scent that he knew would never dissipate, just like stains from a cigarette's fumes that permeate the stench of whatever one is made of continuously. The smell didn't even make Crimson flinch, seeing he had breathed in the putrid odor for over 22 hours of relentless hell. It was second nature at this point. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly before pacing towards the place he had been dealt his trauma. As he got closer, his memories flashed again, remembering when he had been dragged through that doorway by Applejack to his feasting of roadkill. He remembered how his limbs had felt like limp noodles, as if his muscles were made of pudding or jello. He had been dragged from atop the stairs cruelly, dragged back into that room after successfully managing to give Applejack a good taste of her own medicine, and dragged back up, having been inches from the blades of the grinder before Granny Smith's intermission. He had nearly died that day, and he felt his heart skip a beat at the visceral imagery flashing before his eyes. He could see nothing except black through the doorway as he grew closer to the slaughterhouse, stopping to prepare himself for whatever came next.
Are you okay, Crimson?
Calyson asked, causing his nerves to jolt in surprise. His eyes shot open, looking up at the mare who had led him here. He wiped the sweat adorning his forehead, shocked from the amount of pores that had formed in the little time he had been inside the farmhouse. Yeah, I'm just... He trailed off, unsure of how to answer. But upon Calyson responding unexpectedly, he didn't need to.
You're scared, and it's okay to be scared. This place caused you a great ordeal of pain and traumatic damage. It's natural for your reaction to be negative, and you don't have to continue if you wish.
Crimson could hear the sincerity in her voice, and started to regret having any sort of negative feelings towards her. She had just been doing her best, only able to do so much within her occupation. He could sense a much different attitude here, seeing she wasn't confined to her workplace and could push the boundaries more. However, he still had yet to step forth, and he truly did not want to move. However, he thought back to how Dr. Calyson had explained how facing his fears could benefit him. He couldn't live like this forever. Eventually, it would lead him to the point of no return, and he wanted to live a long and somewhat normal life. He had to ignore his fear, and with a nod, he stepped forward into the darkness. Past the abyss, the room came into light, and upon seeing the contents of the slaughterhouse, his mental trauma triggered. The grinder and staircase were still there, surrounded and barricaded by crime scene tape that had become withered by the forces of nature. His screams, cries, and Applejack's laughter echoed like a ricocheting bullet in his skull. He never thought he would eye this hellish place after he had barely escaped from it, but here he was, back and eyeing the slaughterhouse where he had severed his own front limbs to escape. He eyed the top of the stairs where he had been restrained to the wall by those 4 metal clasps, noticing their absence. The only indication of their presence ever being there was the 8 nail holes and 4 rectangular outlines present on the wall. He could see everything playing out the day he escaped, his body desperately pushing out in hopes of the restraints coming loose, Applejack taunting him in her lingerie with that bandaged face, the bottom restraint coming loose, causing Applejack's head to fall forward into the blades of the grinder entrance, him falling forward and breaking her back, and him pulling the switch to end Applejack's life for good. It was all as clear as day, and upon moving his gaze from the machine, he quickly addressed Calyson. I need to leave. It was low, causing his sidekick to question him.
What's wrong, Crimson? Are you okay?
Crimson gave her no warning, and just objected to the current situation at hoof. I need to leave, he shouted, turning and taking off in a hasty trot.
Crimson! Wait!
Calyson attempted to respond, but by the time the words even escaped her mouth, Crimson had already left beyond the doorway they had entered through. The red-clad stallion trotted endlessly to no clear destination, his emotions being a chaotic frenzy of fear and sadness. He'd passed several of the Canterlot quarantine facility ponies in his hasty retreat from the slaughterhouse, but he'd passed too fast before they could even get a word out. Crimson had no idea why he had reacted the way he had, but only upon his stop in some area of the farmhouse had he realized just how much energy he'd spent trying to get away from that accursed area that had left unhealable scars to his psyche and more. He breathed heavily, resting his head back against the wall of some room that had been gutted dry of its contents from the past. Indents of 4 round posts, a few rectangular sorts of furniture, and a lone closet on the opposite side were the only indication that this had once been a bedroom to one of the apples. Judging from the length and width of where the bed had once resided, Crimson had guessed it to be the youngest apple, Apple Bloom, who had met a grim fate much too early in her short life. Upon that analysis, Crimson felt a ping of emotion to his heart. At one point, a young filly had slept and resided here without any fear. Then everything went to hell when Applejack had hatched her scheme. It must have been painful to watch your loved ones slowly turn into monsters, when at one point they were just like any other innocent pony. It was uncomfortable to sit there any longer, so Crimson worked himself to his hooves, making sure to take it slow and easy. He eyed the doorway and started his way towards it, up until something stopped him. A flash just outside the doorway. He had seen it right out of the corner of his eye, assuming it to be his mind playing tricks on him. Therefore, he just ignored it and continued his way back to the downstairs area. Upon stepping out of the room, he saw it again, but this time, it wasn't just a flash. It had been the back end of a filly making its way into the next room on the right side of the long hallway. However, it was the tail and colors that made him freeze in bewilderment the most. The colors having been red and yellow, the very same colors that the youngest apple had worn. He was absolutely sure that this wasn't just a case of mind tricks or hallucinating, and he felt compelled to follow whatever he had seen. It seemed like this supposed fragment of a deceased filly was leading him to something. So he didn't say anything and just moved to the room he had seen them enter. Upon entering the room, he had started to feel uneasy and gained a heavy motion of disturbia. The 2 brands on his flanks started to burn with might, and upon that sensation, he knew exactly where he was. This had once been the room of the mare who had marked him with said brands, Bittersweet Applejack. He gritted his teeth and grunted at the pain scorching his flanks, feeling as if he were back in the slaughterhouse being branded by that sinister mare yet again. He wanted to leave the area, up until he remembered that he had decapitated that bitch in an act of absolute vengeance for all who had suffered at her hooves. She wasn't here, and none of what he was currently experiencing was real. It was all a mirage being caused by his trauma, and he couldn't let this trickery fool him anymore. It's not real. None of this is real. Upon the end of his statements, all of the pain, uneasiness, and fear stopped instantaneously. He opened his eyes to the sight of the room that had long since lost its previous occupant, and everything else along with it. It was just that. A room, and only that. Wiping the sweat from his brow, he eyed the room for the mysterious guide that had led him here. Upon the sound of a creak grazing his ears, he quickly moved to where it had originated. The closet. Stepping into the half-closed closet space, he was met with an open entrance to some secret area of the Apples farmhouse. It was just big enough for him to slip into, and upon eyeing the opening, realized that there was no light to indicate the depth of this secret path. He needed a flashlight or something to indicate that this was even safe to enter. Then a sudden sound from behind him made him jump, turning and seeing a flashlight on the floor. Now things were starting to get weird, but he sensed no ill intent or evil with whatever was leading him into what seemed like the very depths of hell itself. He didn't question anything, took the practical torch in his right hoof, switched it on, and shined it into the hole. At first, it seemed like there was no sort of way to travel further down, up until he saw the two metal beams right before his front hoofs. He shined the light near his new discovery, and upon closer inspection, found that there was a ladder that extended all the way past where his light could reach. It seemed sturdy enough to hold his weight, the condition of the metal seeming more new than aged with rust. He guessed it as something that had been added around the end of the massacre's duration, long past the installation of the grinder. Probably some path to an area where they could store the corpses or something. He guessed in his mind. The guess of it being a storage area for corpses was immediately dropped upon there being no smell. Had there been any corpses at the end of the ladder, there would be an overwhelming stench of rotting bodies permeating the passage. He was thankful he was wrong, and upon noticing the lack of any metallic odor as well, knew it wasn't another area for storing their victims' blood away. However, if it wasn't a storage chamber for any bodies or their secret ingredient for what was force-fed to every pony yet to be taken, then what lay at the end of this secret path? For some forces to have led him here, it was definitely important. And his curiosity was even more set on traversing this ladder to who knows where. Set on his choice, he positioned himself steadily into the hole and grasped the ladder bars to avoid falling to assured death. Step by step, he started to climb down to wherever the unknown force wanted him to go, the flashlight between his teeth being his only guide in his descent. The pathway was just wide enough for one pony about his size, and that was enough assurance that the pathway had been designed for Applejack. Upon that confirmation, Crimson felt his body shiver, knowing just what sort of games she had liked to play with her victims. Was he descending into some kind of torture chamber where she performed whatever acts she wished in secrecy? Would he find one of the missing victims down here long past dead? The thought of it made him shiver more, and upon a sudden change in temperature in his limited claustrophobic space, he knew he was past the lowest part of the farmhouse. It had become cool and musty, and that was an indication of him being underground. Now realizing that this led to some underground area where they could hide something. But what was so valuable to the apples that it needed to be hid away in secret? Upon his back hoof touching something cold, he jumped in surprise. But as soon as he'd realized that he'd met the end of the ladder, he calmed. Getting off the ladder, he was met with a dark corridor that was high enough to walk through without hitting your head. Steadying his flashlight, he walked into the corridor up until he came to a crossroads. There were 3 separate paths, each the same height with nothing but black accompanying their openings. He had no idea which way to go, up until something graced his ears.
This way.
It had come from the corridor to his left, so he just followed it, immediately finding something that furthered the apple's evil acts beyond what he had thought prior. Prison cells. Each side was composed of a prison cell, growing in number further onward. However, that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing thing about these cells was the fact that skeletons occupied them, meaning these ponies had died years ago. The only thing that remained in their cells was their remains and a water dish with their names carved into it. It was a sight that made Crimson sick to his stomach, knowing these ponies were the ones yet to be found. How long had they been in these cages before they had finally taken their last breaths? Crimson didn't even want to think about the agonizing weight these poor souls had to suffer through to finally escape their torture, and shielded his eyes from the horrifying sight. He was just about to turn to leave, up until he heard the same voice caress his eardrums yet again.
There.
As much as he didn't want to go any further, he knew now that he was being led to something important. Something he knew this guide wanted him to find. Shaking off the shock and horror he had just discovered, he moved further on. He walked about another 20 yards, up until he found himself at a door. Crimson knew this was the end of the line. Something was in here, whatever this mysterious force had wanted him to find. Grasping the knob, he turned it and became surprised when he wasn't stopped by any lock. It opened with absolute ease, and upon shining the light into the room, found that it contained shelves with a variety of things. They lined each wall, and upon further analysis, Crimson realized exactly what these items were. Souvenirs. These were things that had once belonged to each victim, and were taken as a means of twisted remembrance. From pocket watches to gold teeth to rings, Crimson was horrified. There was no boundaries to just how evil that twisted family had been. Then, he saw something. Something out of place. In the middle of the room was something that Crimson couldn't describe, but upon noticing it, that feeling of disturbia returned. There was something unnatural about the object, as if it were composed of a pure form of evil that was so concentrated that it could harm any pony who dared to approach it. He now knew that this was what he had been led to, and upon investigating it a little more thoroughly, saw that it was some kind of slab wrapped with flesh that had been inscribed with some form of ancient scripture. It was unlike anything he'd seen in his entire life. What the hell did you lead me to? He questioned. There was no answer, but he knew this was why he was here. Whatever in Celestia's name this thing was, it was clearly important and vital to some reason yet to be discovered. However, he couldn't just walk out of here with it, and knew he'd have to come back for it another day. Whatever you are that led me here, you must prevent those ponies up above from finding this place for now. I have no way of hiding this or keeping it secret right now. But if this thing is as important as you're making it out to be, I must return another day. For some reason, even though no answer had been given, he knew that he had gotten across the message to whomever was lurking in the shadows. With that, he turned back to the door and returned to where he had come from, intending to find a way to complete the task he had been assigned on another day in the near future.
And it did return. 1 week later.
Clarified the gruffy voice of Crimson Flash, now aged and weak from growing old.
I found out through a specialist that what I was led to was exactly what I described it as. An object that was built of nothing but concentrated demonic energy that could very well cause fatal damage to pure ponies such as any of us. However, I was fortunate that who created that thing was no longer living. Otherwise, I may not have made it out of that chamber alive. I would have joined the rest of those victims in eternal slumber.
And what exactly is this thing?
Flora questioned, sitting across from the worn stallion and pointing at the very object she'd found with Henry in that otherworldly dimension. However, this version didn't radiate the same energy that the other one had, and appeared more as just a dried up ancient stone wrapped in rotted leather. The reason was obvious, and upon Crimson's previous statement, she knew this may very well be her last night of life. Crimson grunted under his breath as he sat up, eyeing Flora with an expression of seriousness.
It's called a sacramonius. It's a vessel created that binds to one soul using flesh of a victim and an inscription of the chant that binds them to it, even beyond death. The bond lasts for as long as the creator lives, but once they die, it's severed, and the sacramonius becomes nothing but a flesh-wrapped slab with remnants of minor evil energy.
Flora nodded, continuing to eye the original sacramonias that had been forged by that twisted bitch, now aware of the amount of danger she was about to put herself in.
So essentially, you're telling me the only way to destroy the one that my friend discovered is to kill the forger? A demon who is already dead and has powers that are beyond even the limits of any type of magic.
Crimson nodded.
If you even attempt to get close to the sacramonius that is fully active, you won't even make it out of the basement.
A chill slithered down Flora's spine, but she had been prepared for this, knowing that what Henry had discovered wasn't anything of any ordinary nature. She'd had a lot of time to process what she'd faced tonight, and so far, it was going exactly as she'd predicted.
I'm willing to take any risk necessary to end the reign of these monsters. I'm not just doing this to fulfill my friend's last wish, but to also prove my innocence and expose Princess Flair's lies. She's the main reason any of this is happening in the first place. So everybody must be shown the truth that she's hid and abused for 2 decades.
Miss Bloom, I understand your intentions, but you're playing with fire doing this. Exposing royalty and killing demons with godly abilities is the equivalent of managing to accomplish world peace. Impossible. Let me ask you something. How do you kill a creature that's already dead?
Flora sighed, knowing the answer to that was obvious, but she hadn't come all this way for nothing.
There has to be a way, Mr. Flash. Everybody back then thought the Apple family couldn't be stopped, up until you proved them wrong. Therefore, it can't be impossible to end their reign again. You stopped them once before, so give me a chance to stop them again.
Crimson closed his eyes and let out a thoughtful grunt. Flora could tell that she'd hit a soft spot that he couldn't defend, and that was enough for her to open a door to potentially sway Crimson in her mission. He opened his eyes again and eyed Flora with a gaze that spelled out defeat.
What you're proposing is suicide, child. But I can clearly see that your mind is made up. Therefore, I will give you assistance in any way I can, in preparation for what could be your final night of life in this world.
Flora smiled in victory, knowing she had won a great ally in this last stand.
Thank you, Mr. Flash.
Crimson just nodded as an answer, continuing to fulfill his promise.
Now, you'll need certain things to even have a chance. Things I cannot provide. Therefore, I want you to go to the address I'm going to give you. There will be some pony there who will be able to provide more information that I can give you, as well as what you'll need to accomplish your mission goal.
Crimson grabbed a piece of paper and a pen from the table next to him and scribbled the address onto it. After he finished his task, he ripped the paper to a much shorter length, folded the piece, then handed it to Flora gently. Flora took the folded information and stuck it into the pocket of her attire that Sassy had provided upon their escape.
Good luck. May Celestia's guidance and protection be with you.
Thank you, Mr. Flash. For you and all of the victims, I promise to do all I can to avenge them.
I believe you, and really hope to see your face again.
Flora smiled, then turned to the exit, and with Sassy tailing her, started their way to the address Crimson had provided them. The ride had been about 20 minutes, having come to an area that looked like it had been abandoned and ruled over by the overgrowth that had surrounded the only visible path. The headlights of Sassy's car illuminated the dirt path where, in the distance, a lone building stood. Flora would have abandoned the idea of even coming here, but there was an actual sign of life actually existing in the clearly aged building. Candlelight. It was eerie along with the sunset in the distance, but Flora knew she had a job to do, so she threw all of her speculation and fear out of the window and opened her car door. Sassy followed suit, killing the engine and opening her own door out into the mildly chilly night. Shutting their respective doors, Flora and Sassy carefully maneuvered around the foliage covering the pathway and reached the entrance of the building. It was dark, but Flora could make out the door, a well-carved image of some sort of historic religious event on the doors outside. Sassy did the honors by knocking on the door, the knocks echoing like a giant's footsteps throughout the surrounding area. The shuffling of hoofsteps sounded from the other side from afar, and upon them encroaching and opening the door, Flora instantly recognized the occupant. It was Xena, the zebra she'd received the harmless potions from every nightmare night. Without a shred of doubt, this definitely was the last face she expected to see tonight.
Xena?
Flora immediately asked, somehow feeling like she didn't need to run in fear of Xena calling the police.
Hello, Flora. I've been expecting your arrival. There's no need to worry. I have no intention of sending you back to Canterlot.
Flora could tell she wasn't lying, seeing Xena had always seemed kind and wise. However, what Flora found odd was that Xena was out here and not in her home. Not to mention, she'd been expecting her. What exactly was going on right now? Xena had opened the door wide, allowing Sassy and Flora full entry into the decrepit building.
Come, child. I'll explain everything in due time.
Flora felt safe to enter, so she did. She stepped past Xena into the dimly lit building that she knew now was a church. It was empty except for one lone table in the center and 3 seats for all of them, and that immediately made Flora jump. How had Xena known that she would be accompanied by Sassy? Flora somehow knew she'd get answers, so she moved further into the building and took a seat, Sassy not far behind her. Upon Sassy taking her seat, Xena followed up by seating herself across from them as well, her demeanor calm and subtle.
You must have many questions, dear, and I promise I'll answer them shortly. But let me start by saying something that'll give you comfort. I know you did nothing wrong and are innocent of all the crimes you were framed for by Princess Fleur.
Flora's eyes bulged, and she almost cried at the statement. No pony except Sassy had believed her in so long, so it felt as if a heavy lead block had been lifted from her shoulders. But the question still remained on how she knew all of this. Her answer came shortly after.
You must be confused, but it's simple. You and I share a common enemy, and I know you've met them and survived, but lost something in the process. Losing your friends and dear mother in one night must have been unbelievably painful, and I'm truly sorry that you have experienced so much agony and despair in the past year. However, the fact you're still alive and your will remains strong shows that you are more than just an average pony. I admire you for that, seeing I too have lost loved ones to those monsters, but never could find the strength to go back for them.
Her voice radiated emotion off of the end of that statement, and Flora could feel and understand her pain.
I'm so sorry, but know that you're not a coward for not going back. I had to learn the hard way that there's no saving some pony once they're killed. My friends paid the price for my stupidity, and that's the main reason why I need to go back, to make up for my mistakes by freeing their souls, or die trying.
Xena only met Flora's gaze, a light smile grazing her lips as she spoke up.
I admire your bravery and loyalty, dear, but you should know that I've seen what you experienced and can confidently say that your friends don't blame you for anything.
Flora's eyes widened, and she gasped at those words.
What do you mean? How could you possibly know?
Flora questioned, expecting a clear answer.
Oh, I guess I should be more clear. Zebras are very spiritual creatures, and with Ponyville being the site of that massacre all those years ago, I have a heavy connection to all that died, seeing their souls are connected to that place. My grandmare, a witch doctor named Sakura, was one of those victims, and before she was murdered, she managed to create a spiritual connection from that farmhouse to Ponyville. That way, the truth would be known to all of her family. When you and your friends went there last year, I felt it. And by the time I managed to make a full connection to the dimension, you were the only one I could see. I am truly sorry I couldn't get to you sooner, but connecting to that dimension wasn't something I was prepared for. However, I knew I had to do my best, so I managed to transport you back right before dawn. After you escaped, I saw your nightmares and felt your grief and fear. It was a feeling that broke my heart, and upon the night you were arrested, I knew something was amiss. With you having lingering connections to that place, I could see your nightmares in that dreaded prison, and knew everything I saw was true. I knew everything about what happened that night, as much as the fact that if I had not gotten you out that night, you would have been stuck in a dimension for eternity.
Flora was shocked. Xena had been her savior that night, not the rising of the sun. Just the thought of being stuck in there for any longer made her shiver and sweat, but she quickly shook those factors away, knowing what was about to come shortly.
I truly think that you saved me. But if you see my dreams, you also know why I'm here.
Flora stated, to which Xena nodded.
That's why I'm here, Flora. I want to help you destroy what took everything from both of us and free every soul trapped in that celestial forsaken place. I wasn't there for you and your friends last year, but this time I'm ready and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to end that family's reign.
Then let's start by figuring out how to kill something that's already dead. I already know I can destroy that place and free all of the trapped souls of the victims. But to do it, I must somehow break the connection of Applejack to what we know is a Sacrimonious.
Xena jumped at the mention of the thing that provided immortality to the apples beyond death, immediately causing Flora to catch on to the fact that Xena was aware of just how dangerous and deadly of a task she was about to engage in.
So you are aware of the object?
Very, child. I'm also aware of the only possible solution to breaking the link.
Flora's eyes widened in shock and relief. Her task had become less of a suicide mission and guessing game, with knowing the actual way to finish what she'd started.
You do?
Yes, but you must also be aware that the task needed to be done to do so has been attempted 2 times, and both ended in death.
Flora shook her head at the clear warning, her mind made up with no chance of being swayed.
If death is what must happen for me to save my friends, I will accept it.
Xena nodded her head slowly, knowing the mare before her wasn't going to budge in her objective.
Very well, and I will tell you how to do it. The only way to sever the connection is to remove the one with it from the dimension altogether. However, this cannot be done without a specific weapon that must pierce the flesh of the target to work. Having seen what happened that night and your dreams, I came prepared.
Xena reached behind her seat and picked up something that, once it was visible in the dim light, was a leather sheath housing a large blade about the length of a large kitchen knife. Xena slid the object out slowly, revealing a crimson blade that radiated a very familiar energy to Flora. It was the same feeling she'd received from the Sacrimonious the night she and Henry had seen it for the first time. This weapon was clearly not any casual one. It was designed to be used for a very specific purpose.
This blade is known as a scrungy, and it is designed for capturing demonic souls. It was forged by the great priest of the earliest era of equestrian history, and it was used in exorcisms to prevent a demon from jumping from one host to another host. When this blade cuts through the flesh of any demonic, it will absorb their soul and force them out into the world we exist in. However, to trap a demonic soul requires demonic power, so the blade was inscribed with the very text as a regular Sacrimonious, and works as a separate host for the demon to cling on to.
So basically, it's like an evil soul switching with their connection with Sacrimonious?
Exactly. However, using the blade comes with a deadly cost. Seeing the blade acts as a Sacrimonious, a pure soul wielding it will cause them to receive the same negative effects as you did that night. Essentially, using it to end Applejack will kill you in the process.
Flora didn't even flinch, just eyeing the weapon and imagining it piercing the flesh of that twisted mare. She didn't care about dying. She came back to do one thing and only one thing. Her life didn't matter to her, only seeing Bittersweet Applejack and Princess Flare pay the ultimate price for their crimes. Upon remembering Princess Flare as a factor in her mission, she eyed Xena and addressed it fully.
That solves one challenge. There's another factor that I must accomplish tonight. I must show the entirety of Ponyville the truth that Flare has hidden from them. Only then can she be properly justified.
Xena nodded her head, answering with something that Flora hadn't expected.
Don't worry about her, dear. I already know how to expose her, but you must trap Applejack's soul first. If you can do that and bring her back to our reality, I'll make sure that all of Flare's lies are brought to light.
Flora could tell Xena wasn't feeding her false information and trusted every word she had said. Getting the knife to pierce Applejack's flesh was enough of a challenge, so if Xena could manage the other half and take a ton of stress off of her back, she'd take it.
Alright, Xena. I trust you. No matter the cost, I will take Applejack down and break her connection to the hell she calls home.
Then I believe it's best we get started. Blood Moon will soon be on the rise, and that's the only time I can guarantee you a safe entry into that realm.
Then let's get to it.
Flora's nerves flared like embers in both nervousness and fear of what was moments from coming to pass. The display before her was the equivalent of the prelude to a satanic ritual, but it was far from so, being more of a ceremony to hopefully extinguish the evil that had permeated her mentality for a year than anything malevolent in any way. Like any pony would react, while Flora was dead set on going back to the hells she'd unintentionally entered last year, she was still scared and terrified of doing so. However, while she was afraid, she wasn't going to allow her fear of facing the monsters who had ended her up in this whole mess stop her from accomplishing the mission she'd been plotting since the day she was inducted into that practical insane asylum. She was scared to the ends of every separate speck of fur covering her flesh, but she was also angry and prepared for the horrors to come. She knew full well that Applejack was waiting for her, the bloody message pinned to Henry's corpse being the absolute factor that clarified her assumption. Fear, rage, and grief were all emotions that can drive any pony to what she planned to do. And she definitely knew Applejack wasn't stupid. Those words had been a statement that Applejack knew she'd be back during the next blood moon, and it was very likely that they'd use every insecurity against Flora to drive her further into insanity. She knew she'd see her friends again once she passed through whatever means of transportation to Bittersweet Apple Hell Xena had in mind, but she was ready. She would succeed. She wouldn't. She refused to fail. Whether she lived another day or died in the process, Flare and Applejack would pay for their crimes.
It's almost time, Flora. I'll ask you one last time, seeing once you pass through, I can't do anything to bring you back until sunrise. Are you sure you want to do this?
Xena said, pulling Flora from her lingering thoughts.
I'm already too deep in, Xena. It's too late to get scared and run.
Xena nodded, not intending to question her further.
Then follow me. We have to prepare you before the blood moon manifests fully.
Flora listened, got up, and followed Xena to the midpoint of the practical pentagram drawn out on the floor, the only light being the candles lit at the endpoints of the patterning.
Please take a seat here, and make sure to relax your body when I do the ritual. Otherwise, the trip could end you up in critical condition upon arrival.
Of course.
Flora said, planting herself in the requested spot as comfortable as her current state would allow.
Now the most important step of this preparation process. If you could, please hold out one of your hooves. I need a little bit of your blood to maintain the connection between you and I while you're in that place.
Once again, Flora complied and held out her right hoof towards Xena. With that, Xena proceeded with pulling out a smaller knife and taking a steady grip on Flora's limb.
Hold still, Flora. It will only sting for a second.
Flora nodded, preparing herself as the blade's edge sliced into her tough flesh and sent her nerves into a sporadic dance. She winced lightly as her life supply began to seep from the cut and stain the cold steel of the petite weapon. The incision was no deeper than a light scrape, so the bleeding only lasted for a few seconds, but it was enough to accomplish what Xena had aimed for.
That should be enough. Want a bandage, sweetie?
That's not necessary, Xena. Thank you, though.
Xena smiled, then continued with preparing for the ritual. Outside of the suspense, Sassy watched on in anxiety, not sure what exactly was going to happen, but knew what was coming wouldn't be light. The distraught and lost young mare she'd protected and cared for the past year was ready, and she knew it. However, in her heart, it hurt her that Flora had to face this alone, but also knew why she had to. She had to atone for her mistakes that night 1 year ago, even if it could cost her everything. She was drenched with guilt, anger, grief, and desire, and she needed to do this. She'd either expose the hidden truths of the Apple family massacre and Princess Flare, or die trying. It was hard to just let it happen, but Sassy knew she couldn't stop Flora regardless, and that it'd be selfish for her to do so. However, that didn't mean she couldn't at least give Flora a goodbye, knowing this could very well be the last time they see each other. She got up from her chair and walked over to Flora, the approach causing said pony to flinch in surprise.
I guess this is it.
Sassy said with a hint of emotion. Flora felt a little pinch of sadness sting her heart, knowing that this had to be hard for her practical mother of the past year to accept.
I know it must be hard, Sassy, but trust me. I'm going to do my damned hardest to put this nightmare to rest for eternity.
Sassy put a hoof on Flora's shoulder.
I know, and I believe in you. After all, you made it out once, so I have full confidence you can do it again.
Flora smiled brightly, a few tears escaping her eyes.
Thank you for everything, Sassy. You were the only pony who gave me a chance, and I promise that I'll do my best to not waste it.
Sassy smiled wide, sharing a moment of temporary happiness with Flora, up until the time had come.
It's time, Flora.
Xena confirmed, joining the exchange of final farewells. Flora nodded, leading Sassy to get to a safe spot, up until she was pulled down into a tight hug in Flora's hooves. She was shocked by the sudden embrace at first, but returned it, wrapping her hooves around her patient tightly, knowing she needed some kind of comfort right now. The warmth of Sassy's hold caused Flora to shed a few tears. Haven't felt this kind of feeling since the last time she hugged her mom.
Don't be scared, Flora. Be brave and end the Apple family massacre for good.
Flora nodded again, releasing the hug and stating one last thing before beginning the return to the place that would either end or free her.
Stay safe, Sassy.
With that, the two mares separated, and Xena began the preparation for the ritual.
The blood moon is on the rise, dear. Are you ready to return to that place?
I've been ready since the night I left.
Xena nodded, continuing with the process.
Then close your eyes and empty your mind of everything except your goal. Make a clear path with no obstructions to assure your safe transportation to that dimension.
Flora listened and shut her eyes, setting her mindset to only the things she desired the most. Return to Sweet Apple Hell and end the apples for good. Outside, the bright moonlight shining through the windows suddenly shifted to a mimicry of the entire environment being drowned in blood, causing Sassy and Xena to wince. A full blood moon, meaning it was time. So Flora braced herself as she felt her body become as light as a feather, and the world around her went dead silent. The candlelight surrounding the circle Flora sat in turned as black as night, and that was Xena's cue to cast the spell that linked her to Flora's soul. She cast it, immediately establishing a link right before Flora's body disappeared behind the misty black fire. There was no turning back now. Flora's mission had begun, and the outcome of revealing the horrifying truths of the Apple family massacre, Flair's lies, and proving her innocence all depended on every decision she made up to the hour when the sun would rise over the horizon. What horrors would she discover this time in Bittersweet Apple Hell? Would she repeat the mistakes she made before, or learn from them? Would she even survive? It was going to be a long and bloody night for Xena and Sassy.
Did she make it?
Yes, she's at the farmhouse. And as long as I can feel her linked to my soul, she's alive.
Sassy's heart raced in her chest, knowing it was all up to Flora now. She couldn't do anything except wait and hope that the brave and determined young mare she'd cared for the past year had enough to close the horror story that was the Apple family massacre.
Celestia above, please protect her. Bring her back safe and sound.
As soon as Flora came to, she opened her eyes to a very familiar sight she thought she'd never see again. The tree that she'd last been at with Henry was before her, the mark from the axe still embedded into the tree's body like a scar and reminder to Flora of what she had just done. She had returned to the hell she'd escaped, and now she was on a practical suicide mission to end this place and the apples, or die trying. The sudden realization of her now being in a situation that she couldn't escape until sunrise made her shiver just a little, but she quickly shook off her fears, knowing she couldn't be afraid. This was a place she needed to show no such emotion, even though she knew the demented mare behind it all would use everything in her power to break Flora's mind. This would take an unimaginable amount of bravery, confidence, and sanity to accomplish. There was no turning back now, and all she could do was do all she could to survive once again, and somehow accomplish her mission. Flora took a deep breath and let it out slowly as she turned her focus to the farmhouse, not looking any different and just as malevolent as it did 1 year ago.
Ready or not, Flora, it's time to return. And no matter what happens, we did what we could.
She started out of the orchard of dead trees, taking long and confident steps as she approached the place that she lost everything in last year. It was chilling to see that sight again, but she knew that this was only the beginning of her nightmare, and that once she passed the barn doors, the real hell would begin. The tall doors leading into where the grinder lay dormant were before her in minutes, towering over her like behemoths and laughing at her stupidity of coming back here. Flora didn't listen to the giants and with as much confidence and bravery as she could muster, pushed them open. They creaked and groaned as their hinges moved, the sight before her being all too traumatizing. The grinder that had taken so many lives stood as quiet as a mouse, its presence being enough to bring back images of that night 1 year ago instantly. A chill slithered down her spine as she saw the haunting flashbacks play in her mind, everything coming back to her vividly, detail for detail. However, she quickly shook off her trauma, knowing this was one of the many ways Bittersweet Applejack planned to break her sanity. She couldn't let her past attack her. She needed to just accept her mistakes and do her best to make up for them.
Focus, Flora. None of these flashbacks are real. Just Apple bitch trying to stop you. Focus.
The trauma faded, the ambience of creaking pipes and her heartbeat being all she could hear now as she caught her breath. However, another sound suddenly broke into the midst of the hellscape, a sound she could never mistake. The laughter of the twisted demoness that took everything from her. She turned her gaze to the area the noise was coming from, the source being just behind the grinder. Just as she'd imagined, Applejack had been expecting her, and there was no telling what she was going to do.
Well, well, if it ain't little Miss Goldilocks.
Bittersweet Applejack taunted, walking out from behind the machine and wearing a grin that defined her perfectly. Evil, twisted, and unhinged. Flora just stood her ground, trying her best to keep a brave face, when deep down, she was absolutely terrified.
I must say that it's incredibly idiotic you're even back here. But I did miss your cute little face. It was a lot of fun chasing you around last year, and I was hoping to play more games with you again. I'm sure your friends are just dying to see your face again.
That last comment stung Flora's heart, nearly bringing her to tears, but she couldn't show Applejack weakness. That would be the easiest way she'd lose to her, given this place feeds off of the emotions of her victims. She stood high, and finally spoke to the monster she'd been haunted by since escaping.
Spare me your bullshit. You expected me to come back, due to what you left on Henry's chest. So cut the act and speak to me as the bitch you really are, Applejack.
Applejack chuckled, showing little sign of being intimidated.
Fine. I'll speak to you however you want, Goldilocks. You're right. We all expected you to be back tonight. After all, vengeance is a very powerful desire, and we killed your little gang last year. However, I must say, you're an absolute dunce for coming back. Is it because you want to kill me? Or because you love the sights of your friends getting murdered?
You tell me.
Well, given you did absolutely nothing when we slit that one's throat, I'd say y'all got a little bit of a habit for watching your loved ones die.
Flora winced, knowing Applejack was referring to when Sarah was basically initiated into the massive collection of souls trapped here. However, she thought that they weren't aware of her hiding in the same room when it all happened, meaning Applejack had known. So why didn't she kill her then?
Surprised? Oh, we were very much aware of y'all hiding behind that shelf, little sweetheart. We could have easily done y'all in then and there, so why, oh why would I spare ya? Well, that's because I don't want to kill ya, Goldilocks, because you're just too special for me to harm.
Flora was immediately confused. Bittersweet Applejack, one of the most brutal, cruel, and notorious serial killers of all time, didn't want to kill her? That literally made no sense, and she knew there had to be more than just her being special.
What are you even saying? You're a fucking serial killer. All you do is kill. So why the hell would I even matter in any way to you?
Dear Goldilocks, you're not just special to me, but to all of us. Tell me, what do you truly think our end goal is?
Flora gasped, having never thought of the apples having some end goal. She just assumed they were happy taking the lives of those who ended up here. But as she started to think, she felt her fur stand up straight. Applejack cracked a smile at her prey, connecting the dots. Another sinister laugh following.
I see you put it together. Yes, little Flora. Our end goal was never to stay here and wait for petty little fools like you and your little band of losers to come to us every year. No, Sugar Cube. We plan to escape this place and take back what that ungrateful Crimson Flash took from us. However, to do so, we need two things: a certain amount of souls and a sacrifice.
Flora's stomach turned, now knowing why she was so special to Applejack. She was the one to be used as the catalyst for their return to reality. By returning, she'd given Applejack the key to exactly what was needed for them to accomplish their end goal. A harsh and terrifying truth that made her nearly vomit upon hearing.
Thanks to you, we can return to Ponyville and continue all of our plans before Crimson ruined it all. The only reason we didn't do it last year was because by the time we had enough souls, the blood moon that gives us the ability to bring ponies to our world had concluded. But now, on this nightmare night, we will take back everything that was taken from us.
Suddenly, Flora felt a pair of hooves grab her from behind, ones that were strong and inescapable for some pony of her size. She fought with all of her might to break her confines, but knew she was merely wasting energy and strength. However, now aware of what was to come, she knew she couldn't stop, and had to fight with every bit of her body's capabilities to get out. She tried, flailing, biting, kicking, and even using her head to hit Big Macintosh's chin in hope of knocking him out. Nothing happened. Nothing except her muscles weakening, her head beginning to pound, and the head of the apples approaching her. She could smell her dead flesh as Applejack put a hoof under Flora's chin, taunting her further.
Vengeance truly is sweet, isn't it, Goldilocks? You'll be the reason Ponyville becomes plagued with fear, and ponies, young and old, will shiver upon hearing the Apple family name. As a reward, well, you'll see it soon enough.
Applejack walked forward, Big Macintosh following in her stead as she led him out of the slaughterhouse and into the actual house. Back in the church, it had been deadly quiet. Sassy too stressed and anxious to have given in to having a cigarette. Xena hadn't minded, too focused on keeping a connection with Flora to even be bothered by the smell of the vapors. It was a very stressful and scary time right now, and Sassy was worried for Flora, praying and hoping for the connection between Xena and her soul to remain intact as she took long and slow drags. She shivered as she wiped the sweat from her brow, the cigarette doing absolutely nothing to help and only causing damage to her lungs with every intake of the practical poison. Now done, she smothered it out and tossed it into the shadows, making an effort to calm down in the eerie red light of the blood moon.
Forgive me. I just needed that, Miss Xena.
Please do not fret over something so little, dear.
Xena replied, a smile on her face. Sassy cracked her own smile, trying to lighten up, but given her patient was in hell right now, it was hard to.
How's the connection?
Still strong. I sense nothing worrisome yet, but there are bound to be some moments where she might appear to be in danger.
Do you think she'll meet Applejack in her mission?
I do, and Flora knew it too. But despite that clear truth, she still went through it. She is a very brave and determined girl, but doing so, and her encounter with Applejack will likely be what decides the outcome of this whole mission.
Do you think she's strong enough? Honestly?
Given her performance last year, I feel she has a chance. But this is a strong evil we're talking about. So Flora will need to have more than just strength to do this. It's uncertain, Miss Hudstone, but her will is strong. So if she is true to her word, she will prevail.
Sassy nodded in agreement, but her relief was replaced by slight fear upon noticing something abnormal.
Is it me? Or has the blood moon lasted longer than it should have?
Xena jumped at that, realizing that the red hue caused by the event had indeed long passed its usual duration of 10 minutes.
Now that you mention it, it has gone longer than usual.
Xena agreed, starting towards one of the windows to get a closer look, only to be shocked that the moon was still crimson in color and there was no sign of it resigning. A sudden cold chill creeped down her spine, knowing for sure that something wasn't right, and it only got worse upon a sudden burning pain attacking her soul with a vengeance. She collapsed to the ground immediately, holding her head and gritting her teeth in pain. Sassy immediately felt unease and horror pierce her heart at the sight, knowing that Flora was in danger and that there was absolutely nothing she could do.
What's happening?
Sassy asked in a worried tone, rushing to Xena's aid. Xena couldn't answer, nor did she even hear her ears ringing so loud that it was deafening. It was as if she were being tortured by some invisible force, ripping her body apart from the inside. It burned so bad that she was just ready to surrender to whatever was attacking her, up until it suddenly stopped, and she collapsed to the floor. While she wanted to feel relieved as she attempted to regain her composure, to her absolute horror, she realized a horrid truth. As soon as she was stable enough to focus fully, she found that the connection she'd had with Flora was no longer with her, nor could she even sense it. She'd lost Flora, and that could only mean one thing.
Xena, what happened?
Xena turned her gaze to Sassy, her eyes full of horror and sadness. Eyes that Sassy could read fully, and felt her heart sink into her chest upon fully putting everything together.
I don't know, but I can't sense Flora anymore.
Xena confirmed, clarifying Sassy's assumption. Her eyes immediately bulged, her stomach churning in hopes of not having heard what she just had, but her ears had heard the grim truth perfectly. Flora was trapped in that place with no way of getting out.
What? No. No, she can't be.
Xena had no answer, but little did they know that Flora's connection being severed was only the least of their worries. Outside of the church, something far worse was coming, and there was no stopping it. The crowd in front of City Hall was in a mix of confusion and excitement as they continued to watch their princess attempt to end the blood moon, but was failing miserably. Flair's horn was radiant with magic, but the crimson color remained no matter how hard she tried to pull back what she originally thought was just a gimmick. The ponies before her were both amazed and scared, thinking she was either playing an act or that she was seriously having trouble. Your Highness, I advise you stop leading them on. Ponies are actually starting to get scared.
I'm not leading them on. For some reason, I can't pull back the blood moon. I don't know what's going on.
Flair was showing fear, and it was clear that she wasn't lying. Then something happened that immediately escalated the situation to an all-new high. In the distance, where the Sweet Apple Acres foundation was abandoned, an eerie red light radiated like a sun. And among that, the sound of a laugh that was impossible to even exist echoed loud and clear. Following that, the appearance of a silhouette of a tall farmhouse came into view from where the bloody sun radiated on the land that used to be the epicenter of the Apple family massacre. A sight that immediately struck fear into some of the ponies in the crowd, knowing that sight and what it meant. Flair's ears and eyes didn't deceive her, and her trauma from the past immediately came back to her. That laugh had been Applejack's, and that farmhouse was unmistakable. The thing that she had sworn to remove from history was manifesting before her eyes, and there was no stopping it from happening.
No. It can't be.
Then a sound filled the air, the very one that had struck fear into ponies for 10 years upon going off. The alarm that the apples were coming to claim victims. A single bassy siren that repeated until the hooves of the Apple family stepped onto the grounds of Ponyville. It rang so loud that the ponies before her had fallen to nothing but silence, some aware of what that sound meant, and that it was a clear indicator to run and hide. You caused this! A pony yelled from the crowd at Flair. You doomed all of Ponyville! They're coming! Another yelled. You tried to hide the truth, and now they're back! The crowd suddenly went into a mix of uproar and others questioning what was happening, many running off while others hoped for their princess to explain. Flair was too frozen in disbelief of what was happening, unable to respond, up until something hit her in the face. A candy bar. Ponies fully aware of what was happening were now throwing their goods collected that night at her in disgust and fear, causing Flair to act at last.
Everyone, please listen. It's just part of the...
Another thing smacked her hard in the face. This time, a plastic pumpkin full of collected sweets. It was enough to actually draw blood, and Flair tasted it in full awareness that her lies were exposed. You're a fucking liar! You deserve to die first! Another pony yelled. More shunned her, threw things at her, and made it clear that they were now fully aware of the truth she'd tried to hide. The entire crowd turned on her, and she was left with no choice but to retreat back to Canterlot. So she did. In a single flash of magical light, Flair and her guards were gone, leaving Ponyville to fend for themselves and causing more uproar while more citizens ran to hide. It was absolute chaos as the entirety of Ponyville turned on each other, the Apple family soon to arrive and take victims back to the farmhouse. While it had seemed impossible, in some horrid twist of fate, the Apple family massacre had returned to Ponyville, and this time, there was no pony that could stop them. All hope was lost.